I hope you are all awake. First of all, I would suggest that you come up in front, because it would be nicer, as this is partly quite intended to be interactive. It would be nicer to have you move closer. And my name is Enrique Herrscher. I am chairing this plenary symposium. It is a sort of mixture between a plenary and a symposium, but it was intended as such, and with a very important title, which is Capitalism in the New Millennium, the Challenge of Sustainability. I hope I pronounced that well. And I want to introduce you to the three speakers that will be with us, Bill Shireman and Mike Jackson and William Brehm. We have 2 hours, so we just arranged with each of these speakers to have 25 minutes for each of them, and that will allow us perhaps 5 minutes of just specific questions of the speakers, but then have a full half hour for interaction, discussion, etc., with the three speakers at the same time here on front. So now I will ask Bill Shireman to be here and present himself, which is the best thing we can do. And I will impose you the order of the microphone. Yeah, let's see. Good. I think just took it in the pocket. If you want to run around, you can use this also.
I'm going to run around. I'll run around a little bit.
I know. Use this too. Good. I take this.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and particularly it's a privilege to be here among so many of the people that have helped to define the discipline and occasionally, I guess, the lack of discipline of the field of systems sciences. Many people who I have spoken with who are scholars in this field feel that one of the big challenges that has faced systems thinking has been to find practical applications for these ideas. And that's an area where we've really taken the opposite approach. I'm with a group called Global Futures, based in San Francisco, but that works internationally to resolve conflict between businesses, major businesses, and environmental and social activist groups. And we, along with the CEOs of several of the companies that we've worked with, a few years ago formed a group called the Future 500, which is a network of companies that are interested in identifying and developing tools to enable them to operate more sustainably, to benefit economically, environmentally, and socially at the same time. The kinds of companies and groups that we have sought to bring together range from companies like Chevron and Coors, Procter & Gamble, General Motors, Nike, and many others, to groups like Greenpeace, Sierra Club, Rainforest Action Network, generally groups that are, if you're in that community, regarded as among the more and even among themselves, regard themselves as the more radical of the environmental and activist groups, the ones who are seeking to get to the root cause of those conflicts. And we have found pretty much by accident that systems theory and systems thinking provides us with some tremendous tools to help us resolve those conflicts, not through the old approach of finding compromise and drawing the line between these positions, but by integrating and finding ways to serve multiple purposes and multiple interests at once. Systems thinking worked for us because of the extraordinary capacity that systems have to serve many needs and interests at the same time. The forest, of course, as we know, doesn't maximize just for one source of value. It doesn't just maximize for board feet of timber, for example. It serves many values at the same time. And in the same way, business can optimize across economic and social and environmental sources of value if it gets the feedback that can enable it to do so, if it learns to do so. Many leaders in the business community are discovering this. They're finding that there is profit in looking at their businesses as living systems and finding ways to create more adaptive, more resilient businesses. We brought about 60 of these leaders together 5 years ago in Aspen, Colorado, and to consider how we might operate our businesses more sustainably. And it was from that meeting that the Future 500 group emerged. Future 500 really refers to businesses that want to be among the companies that are most important to the new economy. No guarantees that they're going to be among those, but they're companies that aspire to begin to understand and to put into place the qualities that can make those businesses as sustainable as the rainforest, as the coral reef, as the prairie, as any complex living system that we see in nature. So it was the living system that gradually emerged as the model and the metaphor for enabling us to do so. And it's the living system which we use in our manuals and our workshops and so on to try to present case studies and tools that companies can use. I'm going to explain how we've done this with 4 stories of 4 different executives, Bill Coors of Coors Brewing, Gordon Moore of Intel, Edward Woolard of DuPont, and Tachi Kiyuchi of Mitsubishi Electric, to try to illustrate how these ideas and approaches have evolved in our thinking. But I also, because I'm going to be fairly quick with these stories, I wanted to invite you to join in a longer discussion with us on this topic, and particularly encourage you to attend a conference that we are having in co-sponsorship with the ISSS this October 5th through 8th at the Haas Business School at UC Berkeley. This will be Industrial Ecology 2000. It will be a most unusual opportunity for business CEOs and executives to get together with opinion leaders from the environmental community, from the media, from the activist community, investors, academics, and so on, to really talk about the issues that have divided and potentially unite those groups. So we hope that you will choose to attend that conference. Story number 1 I want to express. I met Bill Coors in 1985. At that time, we were supposed to be arch enemies. I was the head of an environmental lobby in California. We were advocating a California bottle bill. He was the head of one of the nation's largest brewing companies, a staunch opponent of bottle bills. And so we were on opposite sides, but I felt that there might be some basis for us to have a discussion. Even though their company had a reputation for being conservative, I felt that there was common ground between us and that we should talk. So I gave Bill Coors a call. He accepted my call, invited me to come out to Golden, Colorado. At that time, I was there within 2 weeks or so, sat down with them, and almost immediately we started to engage in a discussion about how we could pass a California recycling law for beverage cans and bottles. And I was amazed, in a sense, that our groups, which were supposed to be so diametrically opposed to one another, that we could so quickly find common ground if we were open to the potential of finding common ground. And that discussion led to a coalition between us where we were actually working together in opposition to Coors lobbyists and the rest of the industry in a process that ultimately led to a very unusual coalition and led to the passage of California's beverage container recycling law, which became the most cost-effective, environmentally effective model of that law in the United States. But that process taught me something that was perhaps even more important than the passage of that law was. I learned a central thesis of Bill Coors' business philosophy, and that thesis was that all pollution and all waste is lost profit. That pollution and waste are, in a sense, stuff that companies pay for but they can't sell. They're red flags for profits in potentia, profits that have not yet been tapped. Coors was a master of applying this philosophy throughout his company. Nothing was spared. Spent grains became fertilizer and feed in the process. Inks that had been used to mark the tops of cans were replaced with ultraviolet ink-free markings that sped the production process and eliminated a toxin in the process. Wood pallets were reused until they couldn't be reused anymore, and then they were turned into a compost product and sold. Petroleum solvents, which had been used by the brewery, were replaced when the company invented a citrus-based alternative called BioTea and then marketed that as a new product. Bill Coors also invented the aluminum can back in about 1960. And he invented the aluminum can specifically because it was a product that retained value at the end, and so it could be recycled. And he invented the system of buyback for aluminum cans that now is still the foundation for many recycling programs in both Canada and the United States. But where he profited most was where he didn't just reuse or recycle waste, but he reduced waste. He reduced consumption. He found ways to eliminate the need for resources that provided services. He helped to develop a new company and a series of new products that eventually added up to 10,000 new products. They're all based on advanced materials science, golden ceramics, made products, made materials for use in microchips, in cell phones, in automobiles, and so on. And the science employees look at the need, the end use that those materials were to, and to design and to engineer materials that were precisely designed to serve that end use, to eliminate all waste. Those innovations often proved to be more profitable to Coors Brewing and the companies that emerged from Coors Brewing than the brewery operation itself. So we see a highly consumptive industrial industry creating the economic wherewithal to develop a series of companies that profited on a different basis, that profited not through consumption, but through knowledge, through information. The philosophy that led Coors to do that was something that he also mentioned that first day that we met, and that was his belief that we're operating within what he called an open loop economy, that we essentially were extracting resources from the earth and drawing them through the economy to consumers and providing the value to consumers and the profits to shareholders in the company along the way, but that we weren't closing that loop by also recognizing the negative costs that happened from that consumption and funneling them back to the entities that were beginning that process. And he saw that as a flaw in essentially not just the brewing industry, but in the petroleum-based economy itself. He felt the petroleum and the dominance of petroleum in the economy was a sign that we were prospering from an open loop system that wasn't accounting for some of these costs. And he felt that if companies began to tunnel those costs back in through a process of feedback, that companies could adapt and find ways to do without those materials. So Bill Coors' secret was to close the loop, to draw those materials or their environmental costs back to their source. Now that sounds very unusual coming from a corporate executive. It sounds more like something you would hear from an environmentalist, and yet that's the source of that solution and of practical applications of that idea. What he was doing, of course, was harnessing feedback as a stimulus to adaptation. He was saying that if these real-world costs are fed back to companies, to those organizations or organisms in the economy, that they will find ways to adapt and reduce those costs. And that's the basis of economic evolution as well as biological. In nature, when environmental conditions change, organisms can do either of two things, of course. They can either adapt or they can die. The same is true in the business community, which brings me to my second story. Businesses also, in the face of change, can do either of two things, adapt or die. Given the choice, adaptation is probably the preferable outcome in most cases. There are two ways that you can adapt. Think about this in your own lives. You can adapt in relatively modest ways, refinements, continuous improvements, we call them in business, or you can adapt in a wholesale way through dramatic breakthrough innovations, doing things quite differently, dramatically differently from before. Efficiency means continuous improvement. When we use the term efficiency in our group, we're talking about continuous improvements, modifications, refinements, making the same product as before, but making it better. Innovation or breakthrough innovation means making a better product. So efficiency is making a product better. Innovation is making a better product, making something that's fundamentally different. Companies can profit by adopting those two patterns of adaptation. Edgar Woolard, the former chairman of DuPont, found that his company could profit by doing both. In 1970, DuPont's major competitor was Dow, chemical company, and Dow began a now famous program to encourage their employees to find ways to reduce pollution. In the first few years, hundreds of suggestions were made as to how they could reduce pollution. And those suggestions paid a return on investment of about 173%. In other words, in the first year after those ideas were implemented, they paid back about $1.73 for every $1 that was invested in them. They had a payback of less than 1 year. Pretty quick return. Many people thought that the reason the return was so quick, so high, was that Dow was essentially gathering low-hanging fruit. This is the first time the program had been implemented, and they were gathering the easy savings, and so therefore the 173% return on investment would gradually decline. Instead, just the opposite happened. 20 years after the program was implemented, it was paying not 173% returns, but 300% returns on investment, which illustrates a very interesting quality of information in the economy. Information as opposed to physical resources. Physical resources, as we all know, are limited in value and suffer from the laws of entropy. If I give you something that I have physical, you have it and I don't have it anymore. But if I give you knowledge, if I give you information, then you have the information and I have the information, and you can take that information that I've given you, combine it with your own and create something new, give that back to me, and I combine it with my own information and create something new as well. So information, the trade of information is generative. The more you trade, the more you have. The more ideas you express, the more you can continue to express. And that's what Dow found, and that's what DuPont found when they began to overtly try to profit from this process of internal generation of ideas and adaptations. DuPont knew that to stay competitive and to earn the support of the public and regulators, they needed to match or beat Dow's achievements in eco-efficiency. But they took a different approach. Under Edgar Woolard's leadership, they didn't just focus on the efficiency side, on continuous gradual improvements. They also focused on fundamental innovations. Instead of just making the same products more efficiently, they focused on making better products more fundamentally. Products that performed the same functions as the old ones, but in new ways that were in some cases radically more productive. One of their biggest breakthroughs was in herbicides. At the beginning of this program, DuPont was the #7 world supplier of herbicides. They invented a new approach to herbicides, to herbicide manufacture, new herbicides that were 100 times less toxic than the old ones. They did their job in a fundamentally different way. They also cost less in money and had less of a negative health impact. The combined attributes of that new approach moved DuPont from the #7 position in the market to the #2 position in the market. So it dramatically improved their economic performance in that market and improved their environmental and their social performance as well. That brings me to the third story. When Coors or DuPont or Dow find a way to make the same product or create a different one using the same resources or fewer resources than before, what's the source of the value they're creating? If we're able to provide the same services that we're enjoying today, if we were able to do that and cut back, half the resources that we've consumed or 90% of the resources that we've consumed, what would be the source of the value that we were generating? It wouldn't be consumption, because our resource use would be lowered. The source of that savings is somehow in the design, somehow in the structure. Somehow we have imbued a process with more knowledge, more information, a better structure, structural arrangement than we had before. The source of the value is better design, smarter design, the reshaping of matter into relationships from which greater functions can emerge. Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, suggests that we look at the microchip as an example of that process. The microchip is made mostly of silica, sand, the most abundant compound on the planet. What gives a microchip its value is not the material that it's made of, but the pattern that's inscribed in the microchip. And that pattern is a product of human knowledge, of the human mind, not of consumption, not of physical consumption. The value emerges from design, from relationship. Think about the potential of an economy that rather than being founded on the consumption of petroleum and fossil fuels, storehouses of design value that the earth has provided, think about the potential of an economy that itself is founded on design, is founded on structure, founded on information. And we can see that that economy ultimately will transform the economy that preceded it, the industrial economy, in ways that are as fundamental as industrialism transformed the agricultural economies before it. What companies are likely to be transformed as the microchip economy begins to play out its full potential? The simple answer is, of course, that every company will be transformed. Every company will change in fundamental ways. Every company now listed as one of the Fortune 500 or Global 500, every retailer, every wholesaler, every manufacturer, every extractor, and every institution that every person in this room works for today will also be transformed, perhaps gradually, perhaps in more rapid ways, by the infusion of this new fundamental resource, knowledge, as it is expressed through the microchip. Every one of them will either adapt and become part of what we might call the Future 500, the companies and organizations that will lead in the new economy, or they will decline or die and become part of what you might call the Fallen 500, the companies and organizations that failed to evolve successfully in the face of change. Let's look at each of these, and we can know from our day-to-day experiences some of the ways in which they will change. Look at retailers. Companies like Amazon.com are finding ways to provide products to people without the stores, finding ways to eliminate the stores. When consumers use Amazon.com to ground ship their books and electronics, they save about 90% of the energy that would have been required if they'd done it the traditional way of driving to the store and buying their products there. What's going to happen to Walmarts and the Sears and Kmarts and Targets and so on as that process begins to penetrate more deeply into the economy? Will those institutions change and adapt and combine and sell over the internet as well, or will they go in some other direction? Will they decline or die? What about wholesalers? Companies like Home Depot and many others are eliminating many of the wholesalers, many of the middle institutions that used to be required to take a product from the manufacturer to the retail sector. What's going to happen to the hundreds of thousands of Canadian and U.S. wholesalers, agents, warehouses, and distributors as that process continues? What about manufacturers? Today, companies like Dell Computer, Levi's are manufacturing products not in traditional mass manufacturing style, but with greater focus on customization. Companies like MP3 and Napster are providing over the internet music that people download directly on their computers, eliminating the stage of disc manufacturer. What's going to happen to manufacturers as those processes of production begin to move to the fore? And what about extraction companies, the companies that take materials from the earth, the oil companies, the forest products companies, and so on? Today, many of those companies are the largest companies in the world. But in the last 2 years, as the economy has grown about 9 or 10%, overall demand for energy and materials has remained about the same. That means that somehow in our economy, we managed to grow the economy 9% with no new input of energy on the same increment of energy that we were using before. Many people think that as demand for energy and resources grows, or as production grows, increasing demand will continue to push those prices up. But what we learned in the 1970s, and what we've learned more recently, is that today it's cheaper to replace resources with smarter design and smarter processes than it is to pay higher prices for resources. So our feeling is that it's very likely that as prices for resources go up, we will find more ways to eliminate our need for those resources and create more slack in demand, which will cause them to fall once again. In a time of fundamental change, as we seem to be entering now, companies are challenged to take on more and more of the attributes that we associate with living systems, with complex living systems. Lane Tracy says that a living system is sustainable, develops, and propagates itself. Those are three of the qualities that living systems share. I want to go to the fourth story now, to Tachi Kiyuchi, who, as the former chairman and CEO of Mitsubishi Electric America, looks to the living system and specifically to the forest for his model for how to operate businesses sustainably. Yesterday in the old economy, Kiyuchi says, we manage business as a machine, mostly a top-down hierarchy that was to quickly extract resources from the earth and turn them into billions of products. Today, in the internet economy, no company can afford to be managed like a machine. It must learn to operate like the systems of nature, to be more adaptive and resilient and sustainable. The secret to doing that is a secret that every gardener knows, and that is that you need to manage your business in 4 different ways, a different way for every season. Every living thing, every garden, every business, every person in this room evolves through 4 seasons, 4 phases of life over and over again. Seasons of spring and summer and fall and winter. Seasons of creation, growth, development, and creative destruction and renewal. The essence of sustainability in nature and in business is learning to prosper not just in one of those seasons, but in all of those seasons, and to begin that process over and over again. To excel in the spring, the season of creation, we have to plant many seeds, many ideas, many new innovations. Like 3M, which is one of the oldest companies in the country, has continuously found that it's able to produce about 1/3 of its profits from products that have been introduced in the last 5 years. They are continually innovating, continually creating new products that consume, in some cases, the markets of their previous products, but that create higher levels of profit. To excel in the summer, the season of growth, we must select. We have to take from those many seeds planted in the spring and select those and nurture those very few seeds that are best matched to their environment, those seeds most capable of extraordinary growth. That's a lesson that Xerox learned as the company that invented the first personal computer, the first intranet, the first email, the Ethernet, the Macintosh-style graphical user interface, and then failed to select those products and left those seeds for others to pick up and select. To excel in the fall, the season of development and change, we must adapt. We must respond to limits by learning to be thrifty. Like Target stores, which measures the waste intensity of every product that it sells, the amount of waste associated with that sale, and communicates that up and down its supply chain so that everyone reduces that waste. And finally, to excel in the winter, the season of destruction and renewal, we must preserve our seeds, preserve our templates, our DNA, some the same that we've just been using, and others that were created through the innovation process throughout. Companies like 3M, Shell, Mitsubishi Electric, Hewlett-Packard, and others have proven expert at that process. My time is quickly approaching the end, so I'm going to go to the end. Now through the internet, we have a new array of companies that are fundamentally designed to eliminate the resources that were used to provide these services in the traditional industrial economy, and we have perhaps greater potential than we've ever had before to provide value without resources. What I would invite all of you to do is to engage in this process, to bring some of the theory in the system sciences together with some of the practice of the system sciences at conferences like ours this October, and to draw those ideas together so that we create new ideas. As we approach the end of the old industrial machine age, it's time to move beyond the machine styles of business and adopt new systems of management and measurement and a new set of values that see business and the economy as living systems, sustained by profit, performance, and an underlying sense of purpose long into the future. Thank you once again. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Bill. And now I want to present to you Mike Jackson, President-elect of the Society, and I leave this apparatus with you. And it can be also so that we put this off. Wait a moment. Listo. Okay.
Thank you, Enrique. Okay, I'm Mike Jackson. I'm director of the Whole University Business School. Also edit Systems Research and Behavioural Science. And as Enrique kindly said, I'm the president-elect of this particular society. But I'm a late recruit to this panel, and therefore wasn't exactly sure what question it was we were asking ourselves and what we were answering. And I've addressed it in a somewhat different way than Bill has, and I hope that will be helpful to you. My question really is about whether capitalism itself is sustainable during the new millennium, starting with the 21st century. Is capitalism itself sustainable? So I guess I'm coming at it as a bit more critical stance than Bill did. His was a bit of a paean to capitalism. I want to ask some more critical questions about capitalism and whether it, as a mode of production, is sustainable in the 21st century. And having got that question for myself, I don't have the difficulty of answering it, and I have asked a few friends what the answer is, whether capitalism is sustainable in the 21st century, and I have to tell you that nobody knows. I haven't come across anybody who actually got the answer to that one. So all I'm going to do is to try to bring to bear on that some questions which might help us to clarify how we go about answering the question of whether capitalism is sustainable in the 21st century. I'd like to sort of start from scratch. I suppose the most comprehensive account of the nature of capitalism that was first provided was by Marx. And for Marx, it was a mode of production, which means it's a means of production which is articulated through particular relations of production. And Marx was studying the emergence of capitalism as a mode of production, and he differentiated it from the Asiatic and the feudal modes of production that had gone before. But of course, for Marx, he saw another stage in the development of production, which would come with a communist society, different relations of production. And in considering that sort of break between capitalism and communism, I suppose Marx thought of it in two different ways. One way was to think that the destruction of capitalism was inevitable, that it had the seeds of its own destruction within it, and people didn't have to do much about it, and really have to ask questions about it. It would just destroy itself. There was a deterministic aspect to it, which capitalism would realize the maximum of what it could achieve and would then destroy itself. And I suppose that kind of view about the deterministic way that capitalism goes on could also be a way of approaching this question, whether capitalism sustainable in the 21st century, in the sense that we could ask, well, perhaps it's going to go on and nobody can stop it, and it's going to adapt quite nicely and people are going to get benefits from it. Alternatively, you can take the view that it will destroy itself as Marx did, and that, again, that will be somewhat of a deterministic process. But there is the other side of Marx in his earlier work, writing early in his career, when he's concerned with the alienation of the worker under capitalism. At least in that stage, and in fact politically throughout his life, he believed that human beings could do something about capitalism. We could actually seek to modify it, change it, or as he would have it, we could hope to overthrow it. And that's a question worth asking as well in thinking about the future of capitalism in the 21st century. Whether in fact we want it to evolve as it has been evolving, or whether we want to take action to try and change the way it's evolving, or indeed if we want to overthrow it in the way that Marx was suggesting was necessary. Do we want capitalism to survive? It is a systems question. West Churchman, in talking about companies and organisations, said that in trying to see how they could serve their decision makers and their clients and their customers, it was always worth asking whether we should help them to commit suicide rather than to become more efficient and effective. And you can ask that question about capitalism itself as well. Should we seek to help it to commit suicide rather than to help it to be more efficient and effective? So I'm talking in a range of issues which is perhaps a little bit broader than what Bill was doing. And I'm asking, is it possible for capitalism to adapt and change and to serve various values in the way that Bill suggested it was capable of? Or is it in fact impossible for capitalism to do that? Will it come into conflict with the values of people as individuals, who it still manages to relate to in an alienating way? Will it come into conflict with the environment, with ecology, with the ecological lobby, in a way that it's unable to accommodate them? So my question is the broader one. Capitalism as a system, as a mode of production, is it capable of adapting and changing in ways which will enable it to sustain itself, will enable it to carry on, and carry on in a way in which we would like it to carry on? Or is it in fact a system which will come into conflict with others because it cannot support the values either of the people existing in the societies that it operates in, or it comes into conflict with the ecological system or the environment by polluting it, by destroying it, whatever. So the way I'm trying to clarify these questions is by providing an evaluation of capitalism, if you like, from a broad background, broad spectrum of ideas. And because this is a systems conference, I'd like to do that using some ideas from systems thinking. And I want to look at capitalism in the 21st century and whether it's sustainable or not from the points of view of four different systems ideas or theoretical notions which can be taken forward in a systems way. If we think about systems thinking today and we look at the broad spectrum of ideas that come from systems thinking, I think we can fit them into perhaps four categories for the purposes of my argument in clarifying these debates. There's a set of functionalist systems approaches which are concerned with, I guess, efficiency and efficacy. They're concerned with, in the case of efficiency, whether we can turn inputs into outputs with the minimum use of resources. How can we efficiently turn inputs into outputs so we don't burn resources unnecessarily? In terms of efficacy, the concern is with whether the means work, whether we can get something out of the means to enable us to achieve whatever ends it is that we want to achieve. And a whole host of systems approaches ask questions about those things and try to support us in our drive to be more efficient and more efficacious. And the approaches that I'm thinking of here is obviously a set of hard systems approaches, operations research, systems analysis, systems engineering. The set of cybernetic systems approaches are concerned with much the same kind of issue. I guess I would put living systems theory in this same category, and that may say something about why Bill is rather more optimistic about capitalism than I am, that he looks at it from the point of view of living systems theory. And a lot of the notions concerned with chaos and complexity theory, at least as applied to management, are also functionalist in this way, that their concern is with efficiency and efficacy. What means should be used to reach some end, to ensure we do reach that end, to do so with the minimum of resources. This kind of questions what these things help us with. Now, in terms of efficiency, then capitalism seems to come out quite well. It seems to be an efficient mode of production. Marx had no doubts, even while he was criticizing it, of how much more efficient it was than the feudal form of production, feudal mode of production. If you read the Communist Manifesto, it's a great tribute to the driving force of capitalism as the motor of change of society, driving up the standard of living of at least some sections of society, and enhancing the productive capabilities of society at the same time as creating its own destruction through the birth of the bringing forward of an organized working class. But as a motor of economic development, it seems to do well. And of course, we have the evidence as well that in the Soviet system, the communist forms of system, then they were proven to be inefficient when compared to capitalism. They didn't bring escalations in the standard of living of the same type that capitalism brought in the Western world. There's all sorts of reasons for that, but that seems to be undoubtedly the case. Doubtedly the case. That was so. But of course, there are variations in the nature of capitalism, and everything is not rosy with the type of capitalism that exists in the Soviet Union today, Russia today. As far as I'm aware, and it's getting worse, the length of period that people live in Russia has declined by about 10 years since communism fell and capitalism has come into place. The whole generation is killing itself off with alcohol in Russia, and the length of time that people live is falling dramatically. There's something wrong with it, even if capitalism is often a more efficient motor of production. If it comes to efficacy, how can capitalism help us to achieve the ends we want to achieve? Again, I think there are questions to be asked. Again, it seems to be able to do a lot for us. If we set ourselves particular goals, then capitalism is a vehicle for achieving those goals in terms of the economic performance that it generates through competition. But it depends a little bit, doesn't it, on the goals that we're actually about pursuing. If we take the philosopher McIntyre, who's discussed this sort of moral breakdown in society, he would have more doubts about the benefit of capitalism as an efficacious tool for achieving what we want. It seems to have unpredictable consequences in terms of the types of human being that we create. His view was that under capitalism you've got complete moral dissensus, the inability to reconcile issues concerned with ethics, because people were in a sense not locked into their societies in the way that they had been in the older forms of society. He was trying to reintroduce a kind of Aristotelian ethical system which looked to the relationship between individuals and the state, and people would achieve their satisfactions and benefit the societies they were in by achieving some kind of relationship between what they were achieving in terms of their internal satisfactions and what the society wanted out of individuals. Under capitalism, you don't get that. You get a disjunction between what individuals are seeking and any virtues that might be demanded by the state. Everybody seems to be in pursuit of external goals, or the external goal of money, and there's a real danger there in terms of the ability to achieve any kind of consensus or moral agreement between people. We're asked, depends obviously what kind of people you're trying to, what kind of individuals, what kind of people you're trying to create. So we're driven almost inevitably onto the question of ends. What ends is it that we're trying to actually achieve with the sort of societies that we have? And that takes us beyond the capability of hard systems approaches, beyond the capability of organizational cybernetics, and beyond the capability of living systems theory, I think, if we want to ask that kind of question. Are we pursuing the right ends, doing the right things? Akoff would say this is about effectiveness, not efficiency. Are we doing the right things, not are we doing things right? Are we doing the right things? Can we agree on a set of ends to pursue? If we're going to answer that kind of question and evaluate capitalism in terms of its ability to enable us to pursue the sorts of ends that we want to pursue, then we need a different kind of systems analysis. We need the kind of systems analysis that has been being provided by soft systems thinkers, and I have in mind the work of people such as Warfield, Akoff, Churchman and Checkland, who are about asking questions about whether we can agree upon particular ends that we want to achieve and whether those are in fact the right ends, and enabling debate to take place and discussion to take place around that sort of issue. So what ends are we trying to achieve through capitalism? Which of those ends can it help us with? If it's about material wealth, about an enhanced standard of living, then, as I say, the jury is probably going to be looking quite favourably upon capitalism, apart from the fact that it doesn't always, that the means are not neutral. You can get counterintuitive effects of the use of capitalism in terms of the sorts of individuals it produces. But we've also got to ask, and again, following Akoff, it's not just about the corporation or the system itself. In asking questions about capitalism, you've also got to ask questions about the subsystems within those systems, in Akoff's terms, the human beings within corporations, or about the wider system, the ecology, the environment, the society as a whole, which capitalism is supposed to be serving. And there, we'd have many more doubts about capitalism as whether we wanted to sustain it or whether it is indeed sustainable. What does it do to the people within the subsystems, the people within corporations? What does it do to the wider system? What are its destructive capabilities as well as its constructive capabilities? Is it able to allow us, in the way that the soft systems, interpretive systems thinkers would want, to realise our intentions in history, to be able to create the kinds of system that we want to create? Here I think we're coming to maybe coming to a different kind of, a more difficult judgment to make. Marx was clear, and many other critical theorists have been clear since, that human beings can fulfill themselves in a whole host of different ways, the way that McIntyre was alluding to as well. We are richer people than perhaps capitalism presents us as being. We can be concerned with being, with becoming, being rather than just simply having commodities and having consumer goods. Marx was clear that a fully rounded individual, a non-alienated individual, would see his or her own being realized in the society and in the products of that society around them. He talked about the unalienated individual being able to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and to read Aeschylus after dinner, I think the quote went. Quite an ambitious set of things. I'm not sure whether that's elitist or realizable, whether there's some human nature that we can draw upon, which is going to make us richer individuals, or whether in fact, as capitalism might have it, indeed as I might like it, we're probably better off earning the money in the morning, shopping in the afternoon to spend some of it, and getting pissed in the evening to spend the rest of it. But that is at least an option, and I'm not sure which is the more elitist. The third set of issues, from a different form of systems approach, again, that we can ask of capitalism, are about its emancipatory capabilities. And here we'd want to look at it from an emancipatory systems perspective, perhaps that of Habermas or Ulrich or Paulo Freire or Fuenmayor. Is it an ethical system in which we can put our trust? To what extent is capitalism ethical? The discussions this morning were extremely interesting from the physical scientists. I found delightful about from physics and from biology. But none of them helped me in any jot to answer this kind of question, the sort of question I'm talking about now, emancipatory questions, whether a system of concern is ethical or not. They're below that in terms of reduction, in terms of the kinds of questions that they can ask. only Rappaport at the beginning started to address that kind of thing. You remember he said that, in his view, totalitarian systems were not very ethical, capitalist systems were more ethical, and democratic socialism was more ethical still than that. There are questions to be asked there about capitalism. About empowerment. To what extent does it empower people to become free individuals who can realize their own potential? There are some organizations, and Bill's given some examples, where this is taken seriously, where the issue of empowering the individuals, looking after the subsystems as well as the system as a whole, is a serious issue. But there are many other corporations which operate like totalitarian states, where the individuals within them have no say over what is being achieved by that corporation, or about how it's achieved even by that corporation. And I guess those are still very much in the great majority. We may have got rid of communism, but many of our own capitalist corporations operate like mini-Stalinist states, where there's no empowerment to the individuals within them. On a larger scale, what about emancipation? How does capitalism help to emancipate people to fulfill their potential on a societal or a world scale? And we cannot overlook the poverty in our own societies, but perhaps more obviously in the world society, in third world countries, in so-called South, in developing nations. And capitalism is not free from blame in terms of these kinds of things. And it cannot excuse itself from, if it wants to adapt sufficiently, to become something that will manage to sustain itself, and indeed something that we would want to sustain. It cannot excuse itself from seeking to contribute to answers to that sort of question either. A fourth type, I've been through the functionalist systems approaches, in which I'd put living systems theory as one, been through interpretive systems approach, soft systems approach, emancipatory systems approaches, postmodern systems thinking. We can't deny its place on the stage. Postmodernism is a big challenge to the Enlightenment tradition. How does capitalism fare looked at from a postmodern perspective? Does it throw up originality? Does it throw up exceptions which are breaking of traditional narratives? I think it probably does. It's capable of demonstrating originality, of throwing up exceptions. Is it engaging? Does it appeal to the emotions? Is it something that people want to have fun with, to live with? Unfortunately, in some ways, I think it probably is. Many of my friends who were 30 years ago plotting the downfall of capitalism now spend their time wondering which is the next best .com share to get on the back of, and seeking to find at what stage to buy last-minute .com shares. These are people that were interested in the overthrow of capitalism 30 years ago. Now it's last-minute.com which exercises their spare leisure time. You have to go back to the other questions to ask that whether that's a good thing or not. But in the postmodern perspective, I guess capitalism has a lot to be said for it, unless it leads to the end of alternatives, and unless it's so capable of adapting that the other evolutionary perspectives are thrown out. And it's not dull. At least it's not dull. Okay, Enrique is giving me the signal now, and I will get off. I have sought to put this in a broader framework. I think it's worth asking the question: do we want capitalism to sustain itself? You can take that as a question about the deterministic future of capitalism, or you can take it as a question about whether we might want it to sustain itself. I've gone mostly for the second, and I've tried to evaluate it in terms of four different systems perspectives. From the functionalist point of view, which Bill forgives me, I think he was taking, then it looks pretty rosy. For the interpretive perspective, I've got my doubts. From the emancipatory perspective, there are some very difficult questions to ask in terms of whether we want to sustain capitalism. From the postmodern perspective, then yes, you can have good fun with capitalism. Put all that set of questions together, and the jury is still out about whether we want to sustain capitalism or not in the 21st century. Thanks very much.
I didn't even have to stand up beside Mike, so thank you for complying so well. And now I want to present to you...
Crane, not Brehm, K-R-E-H-M.
Pardon?
The name is Crane, K-R-E-H-M, not B-R-E-H-M. It's a no-no.
Crane, I'll correct the name so that you have also the best information. William or Bill Crane.
That's right.
Crane. Okay, this is right and the program is wrong, okay? And I want to present William or Bill, that's much
Bill,
easier.
of course.
Right, okay, it's all yours.
I'll finish the presentation. I am the editor of a monthly newsletter that has appeared for 12 years. This, as a matter of fact, is the first of the international edition. I published a book on systems theory in a French-Swiss publication, L'économie appliquée, in '77, and a book that was an extension of that. And what I am going to say, and that connects very well with Bill's remarks there, is very much there. There is a free copy of this at the conference. It's not all here. I have enough with me now for about half. You will find the other balance on the tables. Just help yourself to one, and on page 14, you will see an article on systems theory. Now, although many corporations are very enlightened, generally speaking, our systems are starting to collapse. Tuberculosis and AIDS have a pact of co-development. In Russia, can come here by any plane. There are enough bush wars, many of them genocidal, to keep even the military might of the largest nation in the world occupied and preoccupied, etc. Now, the only way of dealing with this is not how much efficiency may have been achieved in one subsystem. As I understand systems theory, it means that every subsystem which has its own logic must be functional according to that logic. Averaging them out will not make the car. An automobile is an ideal system. You can have the battery beautifully charged, but if the tank is empty, the car won't move, etc. Now, it is not a question of doing away with capitalism, necessarily. Keynes dealt with that problem. The pure and perfect market, which developed as a concept only after the Paris Commune, they decided enough of the workplace, let's declare everybody traders. Adam Smith, who is a very much maligned citizen, used the labor theory of value, he used the cost of production theory, and also commanded costs. He changed his his theories of value the way his friend Benjamin Franklin did bifocal lenses. It depended on the problem he was dealing with. It was close to reality. However, after the Paris Commune, they didn't want that sort of reality, and everybody was declared a trader. And this was a marvelous system because there was also Say's law that said that every product, by its production, created its market. So things like cyclical crises couldn't happen And that was believed by economists right into the 30s. One of those economists, as a matter of fact, was called John Maynard Keynes in the 20s and so forth, who had to adjust interest rates. But Keynes came up with an idea. Now, I thought I would have a blackboard, but I haven't, but I also haven't time. The pure and perfect market, which is posited on the fact that all the factors are of such infinitesimal size that nothing they can do or omit doing could possibly influence the market. The only source of information was the last price. They had no other information. The curve of production, price went up as the scale of production increased. These are the fundaments of economic theory in the age of Bill Gates. And what is worse, how many faculty members in economic faculties raise their voices against this nonsense? So what you really have is the market, the pure and perfect, which is partly a fiction, but fictions and ideals can be as harmful and even more harmful than realities at times. There, prices go up. Too much demand, prices go up, demand declines, and equilibrium is regained. Now, what Keynes did, he said this was bunkum. It hasn't happened. He went through a painful conversion, and he introduced what I call a policy shunt. The state has, the public sector has to step in and create the deficit, fill the deficit of production. So that's another subsystem. I call it the Keynesian subsystem, and it's awfully important. With that, capitalism probably could be saved or adapted or converted or civilized or housebroken. You choose your phrase. But unfortunately, they buried Keynes. He's a dirty word. Then, of course, you have other systems. You couldn't have Bill Gates without institutions like Ryerson, and Ryerson didn't exist in the 30s. And that was public investment. The market system could not profit without not only public investment, but well thought out and well monitored public investment. Then we have liberated so many former colonies, but what is happening to them? When you have an independent former colony, standards go up. People aspire. I was in Guatemala when the first wave of revolutions happened in 1943. Wages were 10 cents a day. Came the revolution, they went up to $1 a day. Was that inflation, or was that another subsystem that I call social revalorization? South Africa is a revolution, a political revolution without social revalorization, because the IMF doesn't allow or recognize social revalorization, and so forth. I haven't time to mention them, but all these non-market subsystems have the same feature. If you did the loops as I would do if I had a blackboard and time, they're structured exactly like the Keynesian subsystem. They require intervention of the state, either by changing the laws or actually putting tax money to work. The private sector, the market system, couldn't function without it. Now, each of the subsystems, and there are many, in the ecology, there's not one subsystem. There is the mercury pollution of water. There's carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide pollution of the atmosphere. Each one of these is a subsystem of its own. It has a limit of tolerance to its particular pollution. And that has top priority. In order to deal with the problem of one subsystem cannibalizing the other, I had a problem to solve. And anybody who wants to attack the problem has a problem to solve. In the case of physical entropy and negentropy, negentropy is a gap, a difference of potential. And without that difference of potential, you cannot tap the energy. But as you tap it, as Niagara Falls gets eroded, eventually it's going to be the plain, and that will be the heat death you will not be able to get. Now, in the case of physical entropy systems, all the different forms of energy, thermal, electromagnetic, gravitational, are exactly equivalent. Scientists worked that out, with the exception, of course, of nuclear, which wasn't around in the mid-1800s. But when I talk of entropy, try to transfer the entropy concept to social subsystems, I'm up against a problem. They're different, those entropies, and they are not comparable. And I have redefined that in terms of the means and the motivation peculiar to the functioning, necessary for the functioning of the system. It is possible for one subsystem to cannibalize another in a different entropy. Example, it used to be that the housewife did her own cooking, heated the oven, everything. Then education arose and the supply of manual labor dropped. So not only factories, but also kitchens became electrified, and that created an entropy development, a developed entropy in the power system. You see a social structure changed and was reflected in a physical entropy system. That can be enlarged on, and it will be in some of the literature that you can get your hands on if you wish. But let me put it this way. It is necessary to translate the accounts of every subsystem into dollars. But only the market speaks in money as a native tongue. With the rest, it's a lingua franca, in order to be able to communicate, even in order that the different systems in the subsystems in the ecology can talk with one another, like who gets what money, to make sure that we don't exceed our limit of tolerance for our particular pollution. For example, the family, it needs money only for what it doesn't produce within the home. But the members, its main business, its main purpose, its main motivation is to nurture the members, and so forth. So when we start trying to apply systems theory to our mixed pluralistic society, as Bill so rightfully suggests, we have to start at the other end. What is the limit of tolerance? And it doesn't matter how this or that corporation may be enlightened. What is happening in all the other entropy systems, including South Africa including Rwanda and including the Soviet Union. They're all part of the same entropy system. That is point number one. I must say that I am a little surprised that at a conference which is the 44th annual World Conference, I believe, I hope I can be corrected, that this is the only session that deals with economics. It just happens. You remember that Reagan, or the smart people around him, brought the Soviet Union down by escalating the armaments race. And from their limited point of view, it was shrewd and a success. That same thing, same strategy was adopted against all the non-market subsystems of the economy when interest rates were declared the only way of licking inflation. There are other ways that still are on the books, by the way. In the United States, you still have reserves that the bank had to put up 3%, it used to be 10, against the deposits it accepted. In Canada, we have even abolished the reserves altogether. And it was declared that high interest rates were the only blunt tool the central bank had, well, because the central bank and the governments of the time suppressed all others. However, a little system analysis on what high interest rates do. It hits everything that moves, not only those who inflate, etc. I cannot enlarge on that. What has happened in society and in the economy resembles what the Reagan government did in the armament race. Imagine a biogenetic firm of great brilliance that designed, the Arizona chicken farms where they have 2 million chickens. Suppose the biogenetic firm designed 2 million chickens with one neck, so that one slash of the knife would do the job. That pretty well is what happened with the non-market systems of the economy. No matter how great and how urgent, if you have time to read the papers, you notice that we are in the midst of a crisis of pure water because our provincial government has been slashing balancing budgets. Enough said about this. It is necessary to extend the system analysis to economics. You're going to need to adapt and adopt the entropy concept because there is no way of seeing whether one system subsystem is devouring the other and hence undermining society. I think my time must be close to up. I must have about 30 or 40 of these. Scrounge for the others on the table. There are a couple of books there that might be helpful, but take home this. It is quixotically irresponsible not to apply system science to the economy, because that is where the one neck of the millions of chickens resides. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now have a discussion, and I may lead it in, but first we will get some chairs out, and don't go away, Bill. You will. Yeah, right. One logistics call. Well, you let that one.
I'm just ready to go. I stopped at the test levels too.
And now we are more of a panel, so this is, I think, a more systemic way. This is a systemic part of the meeting, let's say, and there is one hand up. Please indicate, perhaps it's good that you present yourself when you make a question, and I don't know if there are, excuse me, are there microphones for the people who...
Right there. If you just want to microphone.
Okay, so you will have to make some exercise.
If you can't hear me, I'll go to the microphone. My name is Bruce Buchanan. I have a question for Bill Shireman. Does he have any comments on the position put forward by Bill Brehm?
Thank you. It's good. Did everybody hear the question? You may repeat the question perhaps and the answer, and it's good that you indicated everyone else to whom he's making his question, or whether it's a general question.
Actually, the question I'd like to be more narrowly focused is the question is, do I have any comment or response to the position expressed by Bill Crane? And I want to get a little more specificity.
I would like to leave that.
I don't have any more specificity. I could leave that up to you. My suggestion might be a focus on the question of the system dependence of the capitalist system as a whole on the public sector.
Well, I'll give you.
Okay.
I think that we're actually perhaps looking at the wrong level of system in the discussion today. Back in the 60s and 70s when I was more of an activist, I guess. I still consider myself an activist, but where that was more the focus. We looked at capitalism versus communism. We said, is capitalism the way or is communism the way? And I've come to believe over that time that capitalism and communism both exist and existed within a larger economic system that I would call the industrial system. And the industrial system is essentially a relatively primitive, materially driven economy. Capitalism is a subsystem of that within which private property and the accumulation and investment of capital in a relatively free market system does very well to generate and flow matter through that economy. And communism is a parallel system where property is held by the public and theoretically invested also. And what has happened over the last 20, 30 years is we have had a transition in the overarching system, in the industrial system. We've moved away from a pure industrial system toward a post-industrial system that we call the information economy or the knowledge economy. economy or something that we're not quite sure what its character is. And that within that, the system that's been the systems that are best able to adapt have been able to survive. And those that are most rigid, like the communist system, like some of the economies of Asia, have broken and fallen apart. The question is whether capitalism will survive further, or whether we're just able to kind of get more increments of this consumptive economy because of capitalism's greater ability to adapt in the short term. I think capitalism will change fundamentally in the new economy to reflect some of the imperatives of the new economy. Part of what will change that is the switch from a materially based economy where private property is extraordinarily important, because when you're trading material goods and you have that little process of entropy that happens in the trade, it's essential that you have clearly defined property rights. But what's going to happen in this new economy, which we're grappling with now, when the fundamentally most important resource is easily generative, when music and art and literature can be duplicated, and that value can be duplicated easily and distributed easily for essentially a kind of public ownership, and where the creators of that knowledge, as they are right now in the record industry and so on, are trying to grapple with, do they own that? Can they own that? Does it serve society to own that? I think the capitalist system, the system of private ownership, will change away from its materialist roots to perhaps a new form of capitalism where some commodities, physical commodities, are owned and retained privately, and where other things that are very short of supply, like our time, are retained privately, but where other resources are more broadly distributed. So in a sense, you have a kind of a merging of capitalism and communism, or of some of the concepts of capitalism and communism. I'd say I'm not an optimist so much as I'm looking at a different level of the system.
Thanks. If I may make a comment as a chair, I see several things, but several hands. Let me remember the order. I saw one here, one Sabelli, and so I will take the time, one short comment based on the power that gives the microphone. I think we face two issues, and just to clarify, my purpose is just to clarify the discussion. I think there are two issues. One is, what do we think about capitalism as today, and the second is, what do we think of what is evolving? In other words, the dynamics of the thing. The first issue, I would suggest that we remember this dictum by Churchman, that the essence of systems is where you put the border, the limits, or what did he call it? I think there's another word for it. The frontiers, the boundary, right, thank you. So if we take the boundary as individual companies, corporations, I think Bill's examples were very useful, and in that context, with those boundaries, we know that corporations can do very good things and very bad things, and where you presented the good things. Okay. If we extend that boundary, we go to nations, and there also we can look at the nations we know, or we can look at all the nations where there is terrible hunger and famine and violence and wars, etc., where capitalism didn't have well. This question of where to put the boundary is the essence of ethics, as Churchman said. With regard to the second issue, this is very interesting. It is the question of change, of whether a system can change itself or whether it must be changed. And of that we heard very interesting things about the change in the physical area, so this very helpful. This was only what I wanted to clarify. Now, let's see. I remember the first hand was about there, and then I saw... Pardon? Oh yes, you are moving already, fine. So the order will be the first one to get to the microphone. So I hope you have hands and have made exercise before coming here.
I was going to be quiet during this conference, but this is motivating me to respond. I'm Eli Dorsey with the ASC, and I have a problem with the general presentation, but it's not a criticism of the effort, it's a criticism of the thinking. Capitalism is inherently unethical because its very nature is to own a human being's sweat. That is its basis. It creates wealth by owning people, whether it owns them in terms of strategies of feudalism, strategies of slavery, or strategies now of the Human Genome Project and the capitalistic investments related thereto. The game is the same. It's about owning a human being's sweat. So capitalism per se as a political economic philosophy is immoral, and I can say that, and I think Adam Smith tried to say that, or if people read the other part of his book. All right, so I'm just suggesting that I think it's a very interesting conversation to have to determine whether or not we're going to continue to have a political economic system that owns our sweat. Do we want to have a political economic system that inherently owns us, that relegates us to some form of servitude, no matter how many PhDs we have, no matter how sophisticated we may be, all right, or no matter how poor we may be? Is this what we want? Do we want to be owned? Or do we want to live with this thing, as one of my heroes, Malcolm X, would say, with enough dosages of Novocaine, which is what I think our colleague pressing the position of industrial ecology was putting forth, saying, things are not really that bad. We're really making some of these very bad people do some good things. We're encouraging them to do some good things. But they still haven't given up their basic premise, which is, as entities, they move toward satisfying their own needs through owning the sweat of other human beings. So this is my challenge to you. Do you wish to continue to entertain this conversation, and then by so doing, affirming in some way that having a political economic system, owning people is okay? That's my challenge to you.
Thank you. I would propose, if the panel agrees, that perhaps we pass the microphone to the other hands that were lifted, because we may hear some alternative, because we may agree with this criticism, but the question is, what do we have to replace it? Hector.
All right, I'm going to use this idea of grabbing the microphone. Well, I was struck by the contrast between this morning discussion and this afternoon. This morning we learned about the origin of matter, the appearance of the eukaryote cell, life, mind, and all this happened, all this creative process. And then all of a sudden, capitalism is going to last for the next millennium. I mean, this sounds like either wishful thinking or what I think it is ideology. Capitalism is an ideology. Capital is something that exists. Agriculture exists, industry exists, but we're not going to get rid of capital like we're not getting rid of agriculture. Right? I mean, these are realities of the economy, but capitalism is an ideology, and that's a different story, and it has to be spelled out that it is an ideology. Now, once we get rid of the ideology and we understand that there are creative processes, what is that says to us about what is happening? Well, first of all, let me say that, let me give a piece of hard data, because when one has data, one can start thinking scientifically. Okay, hard data, if one studies time series of economic processes, they do not tend to equilibrium. So every theory, which is the most popular theories in economics, in which put equilibrium as a central model, is false. Now, they do not show chaos. Also, chaotic models are false. They do show a pattern which is aperiodic, and it has a 1/f type of power spectrum. This can be produced by two kinds of things, by random walks in a probabilistic model or by biotic processes in a deterministic model. A biotic process is one in which you can produce something that looks like aperiodic and it has all the features of creative processes, but is produced by the interaction of opposites. And this can be demonstrated with simple equations, and it can be tested by using methods which one measures actual data. And I think that that is the beauty of people who are into economics, is to measure things. So what is the important thing of this? Bias is a creative process. Now, what I'm saying is that this applies, if this applies to the time series, it applies to everything. And look at what is happening with economics. In reality, we have had, in our time, the revolution of women. We have had, in our time, the enormous change that happened in South Africa. In our times, we're having all the things that happen about tobacco. There are a lot of other factors that are not economic processes, which influence the economic processes. So I think that this is a very, very important thing. You know, here we have the biggest champion of capitalism in this panel here, okay, comes essentially tainted by a left ideology from the beginning, okay? So, and no matter what, he will influence and will make it a little better. And this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector. This lady is coming.
Hi, I'm Susan Gabriel, and I thought I'll just follow your style. And I came to this session because I've based my dissertation proposal on Michael Jackson.
Closer to the microphone.
I came to this discussion because I based my dissertation proposal on Michael Jackson's system methodologies, and I wrote an article for his journal once. But my big learning today comes from these two. And first of all, I agree that we have to apply systems theory to economics. But my big learning was especially when Bill said harnessing feedback. What occurred to me is the model for my breakfast roundtable, which is my life work, came from a lay learning organization that I researched. And I observed in this lay learning organization through actually Bela Menethi's systems view of education, I observed that in this educational model, they convert waste to resources. And I was amazed. I said, that's why this particular model is so powerful. And I saw in Bill's explanation of, or his, I guess his maybe systemic capitalism. Yes, we have to harness, we can convert waste to resources. And I don't think there's anything unethical about that. I know that's only a small picture, but that's all.
Okay. My name is Steve Kurtz, and my question is pretty much for Bill Shireman. I just wrote a short piece for Research Money in Canada called Economic Dematerialization, Myth or Reality. And you made the claim that, I don't know what time frame, but that the economy had grown 10% in some, maybe in 10 years or whatever it was, with no additional energy throughput. And matter and energy are equivalent, so quote one, was it a global calculation? Two, there's statistics out just this last couple months about brownouts in California and other parts of the United States, and the statement that 17% of the electric usage in the United States is linked to computers. I dare say that doesn't include all of the robotics in all of the factories. It doesn't necessarily include all telecommunications. What I'm suggesting is that dematerialization and the so-called loss of industrialization is a myth, that what has happened is the need, that agriculture has huge caloric inputs. The chemicals are converted petroleum for pesticides, fungicides, fertilizers, pumping of the water, running the machinery to harvest, transporting the food. This is just for food. And we're gaining 250,000 people a day. If they, that's the growth of the population, so obviously they're being sustained somehow. So I'd just like your response on that. I believe it's a fiction. Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite specific, I think, if you may allow us to respond to that.
First of all, the data was 1997 to 1990. 1997 and 1998, the U.S. economy grew about 9%, but its rate of use of energy was the same. In other words, the amount of energy, the total volume of energy was the same. So the rate or the efficiency in the use of energy improved during that time. Now, all energy as converted to a single unit. Okay.
Tell us the source of the data.
Sure. But historically, we can look back and find similar occurrences. The question from an environmental and a social perspective is, what is the response? What's the system's response as it improves efficiency? Very clearly, in response to the two energy crises of the 1970s, the U.S. economy, Japan's economy, the industrial economy overall improved efficiency. By 1990, Japan's economy had improved its energy efficiency about 40% compared to 1973. The U.S. economy had improved its efficiency about 30-some% compared to 1973. In other words, it was getting 30% more economic value than it had in that prior year. Does that mean that the environmental impacts are reduced? Not necessarily. As we become more efficient in the use of energy, we may consume more and more energy and resources to balance that improvement in efficiency. As the price of computers drops, we consume more and more computers. So efficiency gains alone do not necessarily advance sustainability. I think that's where the paradox happens. To get to the underlying paradox, we'll discuss this in a little bit, but I think there has to be another shift, and that's more of a value shift. And that responds to the question that Eli was raising earlier.
Thanks. We have two persons lined up.
Right, okay. I'm Tony Trevorrow from Edinburgh. That's where Adam Smith came from, so that's my relevance to this particular discussion anyway. I don't know, one thing that didn't come out of this discussion is if you're going to have a capitalist system, the reason it does survive, I think, is because it's basically a democratic system. And you can't divorce the voting rights of people from the system itself. So the criticism over there against capitalism seems to me always to avoid that particular difficulty. How do you construct a system in which we do have some power, which is then equitable, and I find that impossible to actually see. Various types have been tried and they have failed. That's just a comment. I think my questions I'd like to ask is one to Bill. The analogy to living systems always seems to me to be slightly slippery here, because when you look at living systems, you find a great variety of different living systems, and it seems to me that the one model that is taken is the one you talked about, with sort of spring, summer, autumn and winter and things like that as a sort of seasonal change. But usually you only find that sort of behavior in pioneer plants, for example. They produce large numbers of seeds at the beginning because they exploit new ground, and then they move on to other new ground, and that's the characteristic of their kind. But in fact, that's just the start of a very complex ecosystem succession in which you get different kinds of investment. Those that grow more slowly, undergo an annual or perennial kind of lifestyle, investing growth, produce far fewer seeds in that, but they survive perfectly well. And then you get the climax, which is finally the forest itself, in which you get, long juvenile periods, no seeds produced, but these things then dwarf the planet, or can do if we haven't cut most of them down. Finally, to Bill, another thing is, I spent the last year arguing about GM food with a lot of activists in one way or another. My one experience of them is that they tend to be totally negative. I've never been able to find any way in which I can get compromise out of them, so I'd like some advice from him how to actually do that.
Thank you. I will propose this system, if the panel agrees, that to continue with the audience and then to leave the last 10 minutes for, let's say, a 3-minute or whatever we have available, final of the panelists. And perhaps I will take 1 minute for an overall summary so that we don't respond to each of the points, if you agree. So I think there is a lady there near the microphone, and there is a hand that should come up to the microphone for the next. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Sylvia Brown from the Open University Business School in the UK, and mine's a so what do we do Monday morning kind of question, and it's about how do we get from where Bill 1 is to where Bill 2 is, in a situation where we've got, on the one hand, frogs well-boiled in the broth of the American dream. Mike's point about the people that are produced by a capitalist, a very strongly driven capitalist system, and the effect it has on their life values, priorities, and so on. And on the other, we've got this perpetuation of the myth of the invisible hand, when it's quite clear that economic enterprise drives many of our social systems, if not most of them, including local social structures, in the case of, Bill mentioned Walmart, to the massification and vocationalization of the state education systems everywhere in the developed world to serve the needs of commerce and industry. So I disagree, actually, with the former questioner about capitalism being particularly democratic. I don't think it is. So the question is, what do we do? Where do we start from? We've got potentially, in the Bill 1 situation, moles in the appropriate camps, if you like. How can this be orchestrated? And sorry to the Baylor design folk, but I think most of the people, including in the Baylor camp, are interventionist and messianic in some way.
Thank you.
My name is Richard Borden. I'm currently at Michigan State University. For me, the three presentations represent the dilemma that the system sciences face. Mike presents, I think, an extraordinarily coherent logic that says, depending on the system's view that you take, then you get different aspects and different perspectives. The notion that I think has bedeviled the system sciences generally, because one could say if system sciences have been going for 50 years, then why haven't the voices been louder in terms of saying not whether it should or whether it shouldn't be capitalism, but how could we as system scientists design better systems to enable people to live better lives, where the questions indeed become, what do we mean by better lives? Listening today, and I don't regard myself as a system scientist, I'm interested in systemic development. And the more I listened this morning, the more I got confused about the level to which social sciences generally and the philosophies can reify natural phenomena. And what I heard today disturbs me in terms of assumptions we are making about the way social systems behave as if they really did exist. Now, we've heard from Mike that it depends on which perspective you take, and I agree with his perspective. So I think there's a very disturbing element here, way beyond the issue of how we design the way people trade with each other one way or another. I don't think it's anything to do whatsoever with capitalism. It has to do with far more profound issues about how we approach what it is that we mean by better.
Thank you.
I think the whole discussion is missing some important points. Sabine said that the capitalism is a very tightly organized ideology. How does capitalism function? Because of democracy, the capitalism maintained so far. Without talking about functioning of democracy, you cannot say about anything about capitalism at all. Because of the principle of democracy, in which everybody enjoys freedom and equality. Therefore, the freedom of economic activity can be guaranteed so far. So it's better to understand the meaning of democracy rooted in Western history. Otherwise, you cannot say about capitalism. It's just very superficial. Well, furthermore, we have to look at the future of capitalism. In information age, the capital goes back, forth and back. Nobody knows the flow of capitalism. In Korea, 3 years ago, we had a very serious financial crisis. It's a matter of inflow or backward of capital money by bankers and worldwide powers. Therefore, I raised the sponsor. It should take up this capitalist problem in terms of systems effectiveness without talking about systems concept. It's really less meaningful. So I do ask you, when you deal with capitalism, it's a very serious ideology in the future. So in that case, we have to think it more in the broad, deeper sense of system thinking or complex system thinking. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think perhaps if you agree after Hector, we may take the time for the...
I need to clarify something that Dr. Reed misunderstood me. Okay, first of all, I did not say that capitalism is a tight ideology. I say it's an ideology. That's one thing. And capitalism as an ideology may or may not be associated with democracy. What I talk about essentially was that democracy is more important and that there are things like, that's why I mentioned the liberation of women, in which what I'm pointing out that democracy can go far beyond whatever is a particular ideology. But capitalism and democracy are not necessarily tied together. There are places where they have been together. In my country of origin, there was capitalism under some of the most horrible military dictatorships. My colleague, I'm sorry, I misunderstand. Well, first of all, I'll tell you something. 2 years ago, I met very famous Chinese system scientist. He asked me, we adopted the capitalist market system. In China, economy is growing well, but I don't know what's wrong with it in other aspects of society. I said that if you government be democratic, no problem. Without democracy, capitalism is a little bit growing up, but at certain point down. So democratic principle is very important for the growing of capitalism. So it is a very important point.
Thank you. We should move, I think, if you agree as a panel, for some intention of clarity or summary or general response, but remembering that systems thinking is the area of complexity. So this is a complex issue. We wouldn't be surprised that these dilemmas are not very easy to respond in a black and white way. So I hope you can make the best of your 4 minutes.
Is that 4 minutes for all of us total?
No.
Okay. Let me see if I can very precisely express my opinion on the points that have been raised. First, it's very unusual for me to be cast in the position of the fan of capitalism, because I don't think that was really the point that I was making. Capitalism to me is not the point. Not, and perhaps there is another focus that our discussion can take. Capitalism will not remain in place for the next 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, unless it is changed. It will either adapt or it will die as a system. The system that is in fundamental transition, I believe, is the industrial system. Industrialization, the machine economy that uses machines to extract resources at a faster pace than ever and to turn them more quickly than ever into mass manufactured products. That is the fundamental economy that is in transition. The capitalist economy is one expression of that overarching system. The communist is another expression of that overarching system. Communism was the least adaptive of the two, and therefore it broke down first. The question is, will capitalism follow and break down, or will it adapt in fundamental ways? In many ways, capitalism is an extraordinary path to physical wealth. It has vastly expanded our material wealth, but in a way, it's picked one pocket to fill the other one. It's picked the pocket that contains a sense of tradition, a sense of community, a sense of connection, and stuffed the other pocket full of physical commodities to replace that. Now, we can never grow rich enough to replace a sense of connection, caring, community, and so on. And we all are recognizing that as we grow more economically wealthy, there is another form of impoverishment that is chasing behind. And that no matter how fast we grow our economy and our incomes, we can't fill that which is missing. The capitalist system, the materialist belief system that says that all value is tied up in matter, in stuff that we own, naturally produces an economy and a culture that chases stuff because that is the condoned source of value. But that will not survive. And if we define capitalism as the ownership of stuff and the ownership of people, it will not survive either because we all recognize that that is fundamentally wrong. I think the opportunity that we have now is as we begin to enter an economy that can grow economically without consuming resources, is instead of using that as an opportunity to consume more and more and more, it's an opportunity to look again at our lives more fundamentally and say, how can we change our lives? What new values can now be maximized in this new economy? We have hardly even begun to do that, but there's an underlying desire to do that, and I think that's what animates the discussion today.
Thank you.
Okay, I think first thing is that we need to be absolutely clear about what question we're asking, and I'm still not certain about that. But the question I'm asking, I guess, is capitalism a system which we might wish to sustain in the 21st century or the new millennium? Okay, sorry. Okay, go on, start again. The question that I've been trying to address is whether capitalism is a system we might wish to sustain in the 21st century. And I'm not sure whether any other questions were around here that I don't understand, but that's basically the one that I'm interested in. And the only other point I'd make is that it really depends how we judge it or we evaluate it, and therefore the perspective we bring to bear in looking at it. From a systems point of view, there are a whole set or variety of perspectives we can bring to bear in looking at it. If you bring the living systems theory perspective, I think you get some interesting results, but it's fairly limited in terms of the questions you can ask from that particular point of view. In particular, the question about the human actor and what we might want as people, as members of the human race, seems to get missed out somehow. And you require other forms of systems approach to ask that kind of question. Again, if you're going to ask the question of the dysfunctions of capitalism, of who doesn't benefit from it, who suffers from it, then it's as well to take on the perspective of those who are at the far end of capitalism, the witnesses to the destruction that capitalism brings in certain circumstances. And that requires you to take an emancipatory systems perspective. You can also look at it from a postmodern point of view, or postmodern systems perspective. You've got to be clear about the question, and you've got to be clear about the perspectives you're bringing to bear in seeking to answer that question. And then we can have some kind of clarity and some kind of proper debate about the issue, I think.
I was rather surprised about the impression that capitalism has not changed. Capitalism has changed to such an extent since shareholders' value has become the criterion that actually Ford, which is quite a company, you know, even though I don't know whether its capitalization equals that of Yahoo.com, in yesterday's Globe and Mail, there was a front-page article that said that Ford is proposing to take away its underwriting business from the group of large banks unless they go back to the old-fashioned standby loans. This is to the Ford company. You have had a monstrous development of stock market valuation, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the efficiencies of all the natural things. It is merely this, that once a stock, by compressing demand over available supply, reaches a vertical position, it must maintain not only that value, market value, but the rate of growth of that market value and the rate of growth of the rate of growth. How do stock market jocks keep track of that? They don't have to. With every company analysis, there is a graph. And when it stands up like an advertisement for Viagra, you know that it has attained the exponential curve, which is the mathematics of the atomic bomb. Now, we're not playing nice. These guys don't give a damn because they think that they can disappear either to the Cayman Islands or perhaps get passage to the new Russian International Satellite Station, which advertises, I don't know whether it's Pizza Hut or something else, so they feel at home. No, this is something monstrous and unsustainable. It's as though they were out to prove that it's unsustainable. And the stock market creates more credit, which is money. And the stock market is controlled by the banks. The banks are not interested in banking anymore. That cannot be sustained, and that is what to watch. I am very impressed by what you tell me of the beer brewer, Mr. Coase. God bless him, but that doesn't begin to approach the essence of the problem. Have I ended my 4 minutes left? Well, to the gentleman who seems to have swallowed the notion that capitalism and democracy are phases of the same blessing, I notice there are quite a number of Latin American friends here. I suggest that he consult them about what happened from the 50s when the democratic government of Guatemala was overthrown. It was a democratic government, you know, in 54, through to the Dominican Republic, through to Brazil, through to Chile, through to Nicaragua. You know, don't identify the two. They can coincide, and we would do everything in our power to make that approachment close, but they're not the same thing. They're not even friendly to each other. John Maynard Keynes would not be a non-person.
Thank you. In name of the Latin Americans, I agree fully. I just want to make some closing remarks. I like to just a reminder of what we heard, and I start with the audience. In my ear came a big criticism of capitalism being like owner to own people, which is to some extent is true, but my question there would be, okay, what are the alternatives? I was reminded by Churchill's dictum, democracy is also a very bad system. Its only advantage is that the other systems are worse. The ideology idea is certainly appealing, and I think we all agree that capitalism is finally an ideology. According to systems thinking, it can be an ideology, and it can be many other things also. So there is not a one single label, perhaps. The waste question that was taken by the audience following the brewer example was interesting. The discussion about energy it was interesting because it's interesting to have good indicators of what's really going on, and energy finally is one of the best. The fact that the living systems theory as applied to capitalism is a little slippery, I think was the term used, was interesting. The contradiction, apparently, I think we all sensed that between Bill 1 and Bill 2, I think was well taken, and it's again an example of the complexity of the issue. We have two bills here, and that's very good, and one mic in the middle, exactly. So I think this shows exactly where we stand. And finally, the word better life was mentioned. I think that was also a contribution. And finally, well, this is a dilemma. I want to clarify finally that we do have some other session with regard